Why are you grinding 12-hour days while others build empires in just 6? You've been told sweat is the currency of success, but your bank account and your weary soul say otherwise. It feels like you're running a race on a treadmill while everyone else has a jetpack. The math doesn't add up, and frankly, it feels like the game is rigged. But what if I told you that your exhaustion isn't caused by your goals, but by a dull blade in your strategy that is quietly bleeding your energy dry? You're spinning your wheels while the world moves on, unaware that you are carrying a weight that was never meant to be yours. There is a specific law, the law of leverage, that transforms wasted labor into effortless growth, and most people live their entire lives without ever discovering it. This is the story of a weary potter who was drowning in his own sweat until a single discovery changed everything. He believed struggle was the only way to prove his worth, only to find that his honest work was actually a trap. In a few moments, I'll reveal the exact secret that turned his exhaustion into an effortless fortune. But first, you need to understand the invisible injustice that is likely keeping you stuck right now. Ever wonder why the guy pulling 14-hour shifts is usually the one barely scraping by? It's a tough pill to swallow, but in this world, sweat does not always equal success. If back-breaking labor was the secret sauce, the man pulling the plow would own the entire field. Instead, he's usually the one with the sore back and empty pockets at sunset. But here is the truth they don't want you to know. Most people aren't failing because they lack discipline, but because they are carrying stones that were never theirs to carry. We wear our burnout like a badge of honor, but it's really just a sign of friction, pouring your soul into a bucket with a hole. You're working yourself to the bone, yet your bank account stays depressingly still. What if the hard work you've been sold is actually a trap designed to keep you on a treadmill while others use a jetpack? There is a massive gap between moving rocks and moving the needle on your future. In a moment, I will show you the story of Thomas, whose honest sweat was actually a wall blocking him from his dreams. But the real mystery is why he refused to see the one simple adjustment that could have saved his life. Let's talk about Thomas, a man who believed that if it didn't hurt, it simply wasn't working. He sat at an ancient, wobbly pottery wheel that looked like it belonged in a dusty museum. To get that heavy slab of wood moving, he had to kick his leg like a mule, over and over again. He figured his daily struggle was just the price of admission for a decent day's pay. By noon, his back was shaped like a question mark from hovering over the wet clay. But Thomas didn't realize that his physical pain was a mirror of his internal state. He was carrying the weight of stones that weren't his, believing that misery was a requirement for success. He viewed rest as a betrayal, a dirty word that had no place in the life of a serious man. He was essentially swinging a dull axe against the forest of life with every ounce of his soul. But why was he so addicted to this struggle? And what was the invisible force nearby that was making his neighbor twice as rich with half the effort? The answer lies in a secret Richard was guarding, a secret that has nothing to do with muscles and everything to do with a hidden law I'm about to show you. Now, just across the way, Richard was operating on a completely different frequency than poor, exhausted Thomas. While Thomas was busy fighting his wheel, Richard was often seen strolling casually by the riverbank, observing the flow of the water like a philosopher. To the untrained eye, it looked like he was just wasting time and avoiding the real work. But when Richard finally sat down, he didn't just work. He executed in short, surgical bursts of pure, unadulterated focus. His vases weren't just bowls. They were elegant masterpieces fit for a king's palace. He sold a single piece for 10 times the price of Thomas's entire week of lumpy pottery. Richard wasn't just working with clay, he was working with the law of scarcity and skill. While Thomas was dripping sweat and looking like he'd survived a shipwreck, Richard sat back with a cold drink, looking calm and well-rested. He had discovered a secret lever that allowed him to move the world with just one finger, while Thomas was still trying to carry the weight of the whole mountain on his back. But there is a dark side to this contrast. Soon a sudden challenge would arrive that would push both men to their absolute limits, and it's in that moment of crisis that the true danger of hard work is finally revealed. You won't believe what happens when brute force meets an impossible deadline. The local messenger arrived with a royal decree that would make any sane craftsman's heart stop. 100 fine jars were needed for a palace banquet in just 3 days. Most people would look for a way to scale their systems, but Thomas, being the stubborn grinder he was, decided he'd just double down on his suffering. He fueled up on coffee and determination, vowing to kick that heavy wooden wheel until the job was done. Hour after hour, he fought the friction, his leg pumping like a piston in a broken-down engine. He thought he could outrun the laws of physics with sheer willpower, but the clay and his own body had other plans. Suddenly, disaster struck. A sharp cramp seized his overworked thigh, sending a jolt of pain through his spine. In that split second of agony, his heavy, tired hands slipped and crushed the delicate jar he was shaping. By dawn, the workshop was a graveyard of ruined pottery and shattered hopes. Thomas sat there shivering, his body spent and his spirit broken. He had worked harder than anyone, yet he had absolutely nothing to show for it. He was finally beginning to see that his honest sweat was actually a wall blocking him from the goal. But the true reason his body gave out is a physiological secret most people ignore until it's too late. Do you know why willpower is the first thing to fail when you are carrying stones that aren't yours? I'll explain the fracture point in a moment. But first, you must see the humble choice Thomas made next that saved his life. Thomas sat in the heavy silence of his workshop, surrounded by a mountain of wet, gray failures. Every muscle in his body was screaming, a brutal reminder that grit alone doesn't pay the bills. It's a bitter pill to swallow when you realize your hustle is just a high-speed road to nowhere. He looked at his ruined hands and finally admitted the truth. Doing more of the same was never going to work. He had been sprinting in the wrong direction, thinking speed would fix a lack of a map. Thomas realized he wasn't a martyr for his craft. He was just a man with a very dull axe. So, with a heavy heart and a bit of a limp, he made his way to Richard's calm sanctuary. He dropped his pride at the door, which is often the heaviest thing we carry around anyway. I've given my life to this clay, Richard, but it treats me like a stranger, Thomas said softly. You treat it like a lover, and it obeys your every command without you even breaking a sweat. He was finally ready to listen. But what Richard was about to show him wasn't just a better way to spin a wheel. It was a revelation about the invisible friction that governs your bank account, your energy, and your happiness. Most people think the secret is working smart, but Richard was about to reveal something much deeper, a mechanical truth that makes effort almost unnecessary. Are you ready to see the machine that does the work for you? Richard led Thomas to a corner where a modest wheel stood. It wasn't made of heavy, damp oak, but of light, polished wood that seemed to glow. While Thomas's workspace looked like a battlefield, this place felt like a laboratory. There was no puddle of sweat on the floor, only a small, well-used bottle of oil. With just a gentle tap of his toe, Richard set the entire mechanism into a silent, steady spin. The wheel didn't groan. It glided like a bird catching a warm breeze. Thomas watched in disbelief as the momentum carried on for minutes without another single kick. You see, Thomas, you've been fighting the physics of the world instead of using them, Richard said. Force creates friction, and friction is the invisible tax that robs you of your creative energy. You've been playing the role of a weightlifter when you should have been an architect of systems. Most people are out there swinging a dull blade against a stone wall, thinking their exhaustion is a trophy, while in reality, they are just suffocating under the weight of stones that were never theirs to carry. The secret isn't in the strength of your leg, but in the balance of the axle you've built. But how do you actually build this balance when your life feels like it's already collapsing? Richard was about to reveal the 3 specific pillars of leverage that act as the oil for a rusted life, and the third pillar is the one that most high achievers ignore until they hit a wall. Richard leaned in close, ready to reveal the 3 pillars that turn a weary grinder into a master. First, he said, you must grasp the power of systems, the flywheel effect. It's about building a setup that maintains its own momentum so you aren't stuck kicking every second. If you don't build a system, you are just a part of someone else's, and that is a losing game. Next is the center. Centering your life is like choosing your one big win for the day instead of multitasking into a coma. You cannot produce a masterpiece if you are distracted by every chime on your phone. Mastery means knowing exactly where to apply pressure so the wheel does the heavy lifting for you. Then there is moisture, strategic rest. If the clay gets too dry, it becomes brittle and snaps under pressure. Your mind is the same way. Rest isn't a reward for finishing the work. It's a vital tool to ensure the work is actually good. These 3 pillars are the secret sauce that separates the kings of industry from the common laborers. But there is a specific reason why most people, even after hearing this, still can't apply it. There is a hidden mental friction that forces you to keep picking up those stones that aren't yours. And if you don't neutralize it first, even the best system will fail. Do you know why Thomas almost quit right after learning this? I'll show you the practical turn he took, which felt completely wrong, but was the only way to save his future. Thomas did something that felt totally wrong to his grinder brain. He stopped working entirely. For 2 whole days, his wheel sat silent while the village wondered if he'd finally snapped. But he wasn't quitting. He was finally taking the time to sharpen his axe instead of hacking at the trunk with a dull blade. He spent those hours cleaning out the gunk and grit of years of inefficient labor. He applied fine oil to the axle until it spun with a whisper and added small lead weights to the rim to balance the wood perfectly. He was no longer relying on his leg muscles. He was building a system that would pay him back in spades by trusting the power of physics and momentum. By fixing the foundation, Thomas was setting up what we call automatic leverage, the same kind of leverage you feel when you finally stop carrying heavy buckets and install a modern irrigation system. When he finally sat back down, the air in the workshop felt lighter, and for the first time in years, the shadow of a painful night didn't loom over him. He had finally dropped the heavy stones of brute force to pick up the tools of a master architect. But would this silent wheel actually stand up to the pressure of a real royal order? Or was Richard's secret just a beautiful theory that fails in the heat of the moment? What Thomas discovered next surprised even the king's messengers. And it's the same result you'll see in your life the moment you apply the leverage method I'm about to show you. The results were almost like magic, but we know better. It was just good engineering. Thomas finished his next big order in less than half the time it used to take, because the wheel did the work. He wasn't gasping for air or fighting his own body. He was cruising through his tasks while others were still stuck in the morning mud. His hands, no longer trembling from exhaustion, could finally craft those thin, royal walls that the nobility craved. The pottery was elegant and sturdy, reflecting the calm mind of a man who had finally dropped the stones of unnecessary struggle. The numbers were staggering. He was producing 40% more with 60% less physical agony. He realized he wasn't bad at his job. He was just addicted to the friction. He had traded his grinder badge for a crown of efficiency. He left his workshop while the sun was still high, not to collapse in pain, but to enjoy the fruits of his labor. But there is one final chilling question you must answer. If Thomas could change his life by oiling a wooden wheel, what is the rusty axle in your life that is currently sabotaging your happiness? Most people never find it because they are too busy sweating. In a moment, I will show you how to identify your specific friction points before they break you forever. Take a good look at your own daily grind and ask yourself, are you still playing the part of Thomas? Most people aren't burnt out because they are building empires. They are exhausted from doing tiny menial tasks in the most difficult way imaginable. It's like trying to fill a swimming pool with a teaspoon while the garden hose is lying right there on the grass. The difference between the 1% and the 99% isn't the total number of hours they clock in. It's about who stopped to sharpen their axe while everyone else kept hacking at the trunk until their hands bled. You cannot build a skyscraper with a rusty shovel and positive vibes. You need the systems that multiply your human effort by 1,000. Stop kicking that wobbly wheel and start balancing your life's rhythms right now. Identify that one major friction point, the dull blade in your current workflow, and fix it. Whether it's delegating a soul-crushing task or automating a process, it's time to buy back your precious time. But why is it so hard to just let go and start oiling the wheel? Most of us are addicted to the struggle because we've been conditioned to believe that if we aren't hurting, we aren't winning. In the next 60 seconds, I'm going to reveal the only way to break this addiction to pain and finally trade your badge of burnout for a crown of impact. Because there is a specific reason why you keep picking up those stones, and I have the tool to help you drop them forever. Look, the world doesn't pay for your sweat. It pays for the value you produce. You can keep swinging that dull axe until your hands bleed, or you can finally stop and sharpen the blade. If you are exhausted at the end of the day with zero growth, you aren't just working hard, you are hurting yourself. Many of the stories you hear here aren't just stories. They reflect the invisible weight you may be carrying every day. Like Thomas, you might be fighting a heavy wheel because you've accepted responsibilities, guilt, and pains that were never yours to carry. You've been a weightlifter in a potter shop for too long. If you're tired of holding pain, responsibility, and guilt that were never yours, I created a guide to help you drop those stones forever. It's called The Weight of Stones That Are Not Yours. This is the oil for your rusted axle and the balance for your wobbly wheel. But I want to make sure you have the complete system to prevent those stones from being piled back on your shoulders. That's why, when you get the ebook today, you'll also receive 2 vital bonuses. Bonus 1, Learning to Let Go. This is your manual for releasing the ruined clay of the past so you can start fresh with a clear mind. Bonus 2, When Saying No is an Act of Self-Love. The ultimate tool to set boundaries and ensure you never pick up someone else's stone again. The 1% didn't get there by working 100 times harder. They found 100 ways to leverage their time and protect their peace. It's high time you traded that badge of burnout for a crown of efficiency and impact. Don't let another year pass where your only achievement is how many hours you stayed awake. Stop being a victim of your tools and start being the architect of your own freedom. The link to The Weight of Stones That Are Not Yours and all your bonuses is in the description and in the pinned comment. Click it now. Let the wheel start spinning for you and reclaim the life you were meant to lead.